Hello, folks. Let's talk about new historicism and reading our world. A look at portrayals of history as a lens for looking at nonfiction. Oftentimes, when we're introduced to nonfiction or historical accounts, we think to ourselves, that's true. Should we be thinking that way? Maybe not. Let's look at the concept of historiography. Historiography is the process by which we study history or present history. When we look at historiography, let's look at the way we used to do history, that which is on the left side. Historians as professionals. If you're trained as a historian, then your historical account should be accurate. That's the thought. In this case, history is knowable. We can look at the past and find out what really happened. Historical interpretations are accurate because they're done by professional historians. Students really can't be historians because they're not trained in historiography or how to do it. And historical accounts can stand alone. You can read an account about history and know what you need to know. At least that's the way we used to look at history. We also tended to look at history by the people who won the war, and we looked at the important people in history. Well, let's take another look at the possibility of how to look at history, which is new historicism, and the list on the right. Historians are biased. It doesn't matter how strongly you train as a historian to get things right, you're still going to be biased by the culture you were raised in. And it's much more important to be upfront about that and say, look, because this is my historical and cultural background, this is how I'm going to see things. And perhaps if you want a full understanding of this element of history, this element of culture, look beyond just my interpretation. Speaking of interpretations, all history is an interpretation. If you don't believe me, think about the last time you had a conversation with your friends or your family about what happened at your last get together. Or that time when you were 7 years old and someone did such and such. Anytime there is more than one person at an event, there's going to be more than one interpretation of what really happened. The reality is that a big portion of our view of what happened is shaped by who we are. Therefore, there is always going to be more than one account of what really happened. And to get a closer approximation of what did happen in a particular situation is by looking at it from multiple perspectives, which comes to triangulation is essential. This does not mean the use of triangles, but the use of looking at things from multiple perspectives. Don't take just one person's account. Look at the same issue from multiple angles and multiple perspectives. Also consider the use of realia and replica. These are actual objects from the past, diaries, newspaper accounts, physical objects. This is why visiting living museums is useful, why it helps that the use of primary documents online to allow you to see how things actually looked in the past. Also, the idea of putting the power of history into the hands of the people who are studying it. It's now understood that if we just have people read an account, accept it, and repeat it, they're less likely to remember it. It also means they're less likely to be critical about that account. So we want to put the power of history into the hands of those who are studying it and saying, so this is one account of history. Is it accurate? How would you test that? How would you learn more? Also, multiculturalism is key. Understanding that history is a product of not just the experience of the people who won the war, but everyone who was involved in that war or affected by it. Let's look at people who have traditionally been excluded. What were the women doing? The children? The people who were not in the military? How is it that we can look at other aspects of this element of history and find out who has previously been excluded and how adding their story to this depiction of history can expand our understanding? Let's look at some of these issues in a little more detail. When we recognize the fact that all historians are biased, then we also raise the question that all authors are biased. So when we look at a nonfiction text such as George Takei's They Called Us Enemy, we want to ask the question, what is his bias? How does his bias of this situation shape his construction of his account of what happened? And does he acknowledge his bias? And if so, how does he do that? And how does it change our view of the topic he discusses because we know that bias? And is there any aspect of this story that has been overlooked or left out? If so, how do we find that information? Testing portrayals is essential. In our presentation on New Historicism, we talked about this in terms of triangulation. That's a reference to the idea that if you have one resource on a given topic, then you should look at least two other resources on the same topic to test its accuracy. What resources can you use to test the accuracy of this portrayal? How do you know the resources you have chosen are trustworthy? One of the other things is, when it comes to not trusting somebody else's interpretation, you don't want to go so far that you test everything, or you think to yourself, well, none of this is accurate. Instead, you want to temper your testing and acknowledge the fact that you're not going to be able to test everything. Students as investigators, you shouldn't rely on the expertise of others. If someone tells you something and you believe them, that's great. But should you? Or should you test new information you're given and look for other resources that corroborate this new view? One of the other things is that by committing to exploring the truth beyond one portrayal, you're less likely to trust just one given perspective on something. And when you learn how to expand your view of things, you begin to see things from the perspective of not only the person who's telling you the story, but other people as well. This establishes a commitment to cultural accuracy, and establishing such a commitment is a form of advocacy. When we do this, we are committing to diversity and the idea that with every cultural portrayal, there is more than one perspective on what is happening, how it happened, and why. And by committing ourselves to seeing the world in more than one perspective, we are committing ourselves to multiculturalism and making the world a more diverse and accepting place. And when we do this, we expand not only our own understanding, but our understanding of others. I'd also like you to explore how you can apply what you've learned in this presentation to not only what you're reading, but beyond that. And I also want to thank you for putting up with the background noises that are involved in doing recordings at home with a family. So thank you very much, and I look forward to discussing these issues further in class. Have a great day. Bye.